Hello and welcome to the Practitioner podcast. This is a podcast from us at Renaissance. We're a network of missional practitioners and microchurches in the greater Boston area. Every episode, we talk about themes around living on mission and living in microchurch communities. And our conversations are aiming to be practical, touching on the realities of everyday, ordinary people. This is because our mission is about cultivating beautiful kingdom people embedded in the everyday stuff of life. My name is Christine, and I'm back because I missed last episode. And I'm here with the one and only
Drew Thurman.
Thank you for letting me come back, Drew. I was a little scared that I was going to be replaced by the one and only Fabricio Pais.
Yeah, well, I think we have to balance out how many hot takes we have on this podcast. We won't listen to it, so yeah.
That is so true. I think I'm like medium spicy. I'm the medium Taco Bell sauce, and he's like the fire sauce.
Yeah.
So we gotta keep it low key. I thought so. We're like always gonna go back and forth on each episode of who's bringing the theme. But before we go into that, I know normally we talk about something super random, but because of our theme, maybe I can just like tee it up, and then we're gonna share some stories. Does that sound okay with you?
That sounds great.
So today we're gonna talk all about just like getting comfortable with the mundane and ordinary. And this is like such a huge part, I think, of our spirituality that we've been entering into the last few years, and we talk about it a lot across our network. And so to kind of get into that, though, I thought it would be nice if we just shared a couple of moments to us recently that really meant a lot to us and reminded us that we're in this work and that it matters, and yet like maybe aren't like the highlight reels of life.
Mhm.
Do you want to start? Do you have a story?
Yeah, you were just telling me right before we hit record that we were going to do this, and the first thing that came to mind for me was we as a microchurch. I think we've talked about before on the podcast. There's several different microchurch spaces that I'm a part of, but the one that I think about probably the most is called Shema, which is a bunch of young families that are making the commitment to raise their kids, disciple their own kids. Shema is it's the prayer from Deuteronomy 6
Hmm.
that the Jewish people would say, would recite every day about training up your children and passing on God's law. And so we take that seriously. And so one of the things we recently had a month on prayer, and we were looking for something tangible to we all bedtime prayers or meal prayers can kind of come and go, and sometimes you're always looking for something that's stickier, that's gonna like work. So recalled something I remember from way back when we did the 5 finger prayer. I don't know if you ever learned that.
Oh
Where
no,
you
wait, tell
yeah,
us
it's like
about it first.
yeah, you like your thumb is like you pray for your family. It's the one that's closest to you. Your pointer finger, you like pray for your teachers or your instructors.
Mm,
Your middle finger is your tallest, so you pray for like those in charge of like your city or your government,
mm,
or the national government. Your ring finger is your weakest finger, so you pray
mm.
for those who are in need, don't have as much, and then your pinky finger, you pray for yourself. And
Okay.
so my girls have really latched onto this. And so bedtime has been so much fun. And I think um, recently just like watching them get this prayer, and there's a couple of moments in particular that always get me. One, um, I don't always love our local government and all the decisions that they make, but my youngest Dottie always prays for our mayor every single
Mm,
time when she gets to her middle finger. And I like laugh so much because I think it's just this like really beautiful small moment where God's like reminding me, like, even though there's sometimes some frustrations, our mayor's a wonderful person still, and that I need to embody that same sort of ethos. And then also, uh, we have, I think we've supported Compassion Kids like
mhm.
I since college, and then our first one, the first one I supported aged out of their need, and so we got assigned another one that happens to be the same age as my oldest,
Wow, okay.
and his name's Samuel, and she very much loves when all the like correspondence comes in. She
Yeah.
leads the charge. And she has this really he's always who she prays for when she gets to
Mm.
her ring finger, and talks about, God, I want you to care for those and be there for those that don't have as much as I do.
Mm.
And so it's just one of those moments, like, it's simple. I mean, anybody who's been a parent knows bedtime can just be sometimes a pain. And my wife and I rotate because of how exhausting it is, who's in charge. And sometimes it's a little bit, there's some deal making going on. But I've had a lot of those moments recently in the last couple of months where I've, like, turned off the lights and stepped out of the room. And I just have that moment of just like appreciation and wonder. And just like, it's this small, rough, everyday thing, but rooted in something that our microchurch did. Our girls have really latched onto it. And it's been kind of cool to watch them get prayer in a new way.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think for me, this is like ironic that I'm also going to talk about kids because I'm actually not a parent, and I'm single and don't have any children. But in our microchurch, we really value the kids, and we've tried to be more intentional. I think especially the last like year and a half about how we integrate them more into the life of our microchurch. Because in the past, like especially when they're really little, we would just like they would be a part of our meal and then communion, and we like send them upstairs and they watch a show. And so we're still like figuring out together like what does that look like to be really invested and intentional in the formation of our kids and really like raise them together. And I think what was really beautiful for me was last weekend. Um, there's a couple in our micro church, and they have a little girl named Kalia, and she's just the best. But she's adopted, and they invited me to come with them to meet one of her siblings who's still in the foster care system, and like that was just such an honor to me, and at the same time, I just like felt so grateful that like our lives are truly integrated in such a way that like I get to be one of those calls. And the plan was that like one of the people in the couple, they had a race, so they had to go down to southern Massachusetts, and then I was going to drive Kalia and my friend Abby back up north. And as we were driving back home, we were probably like 15 minutes away from their house. And we had already explained, like, the plan is I'm going to drop you guys off and then, like, I'm going to go home. And Kalia chimes in the back. She's like, I have an idea. And we're like, oh, what's the idea? And she's like, you drop mommy off and then you do activities with me. And it was like so funny. And like, thankfully I didn't really have anything left in the day, so I was like, that's something we can totally do. And we end up, getting bubble tea together, and then we did crafts at my house before I dropped her off, and we watched a show. She made the whole plan, and we did it. And I think for me, it was really special time with her, and I just remember thinking like, to me, it's so fun and joyful to have kids who are part of my life that want me to be a part of their lives. And I think especially coming from the background that like I used to do student ministry vocationally, and I loved like getting to be a part of kids' lives, and that's different these days, right? Like it's like I don't have these like weekly programs I go to where I get to like work with kids, and like my none of my day jobs are really like super involved in that. And so I've missed that. And I like remember when we first started in like this like micro church journey for myself, that was something that I was like, like I really wished I had more kids who were part of our lives. That wasn't at like we didn't really have any kids at the beginning of our micro church, and then like when some of these families started becoming integrated, we also like I'm not like a super little kids person. So like I just was like, oh, like this is like interesting. Like I have to find a way to like
Mhm.
get connected. But I think to me at this point, it's that slow work of like just
Mhm.
showing up week after week, finding ways to connect. And that Kalia is almost 5 now and like wants to do like activity time with me specifically was just so meaningful, and just and it was just like so fun and funny. And it just like reminds me like, I no longer have those like big Instagrammable moments of like, here's summer camp and all these kids and
Definitely.
but I do have these quiet moments that mean so much to me and that remind me that God is embedding me into his family, and that I get to be a part of people's actual lives in ways that hopefully will be long-standing and I know matters so much to me. And it like just like reminds me like, oh, like sometimes missional living isn't like this like big crazy thing where I'm like finding people out on the street or like baptizing people in my bathtub. It's just like spending time with my friend's kid and like knowing that I will hopefully get to be a part of her life for a long time,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Yeah, and I just, as you were talking, just the beauty of when microchurch truly becomes a family. And
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a really good book, just Joseph Hellerman, I think, When the Church Was a Family. And I think so often, I think we've just lost that. And I actually even think, with some of the most painful moments that I had experiencing church life later on in my life, some of my earliest memories of the church were other people that my parents trusted me with in our church that took me under their wing and treated me as if I was, their own kid or their own grandkid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it was that love and that care and some of what I saw when the church was a family and some of my most like earliest memories of the church that I think I've clung to a lot of my life, that when things have gotten rough, I'm like, well, I've at least seen this.
Yeah.
And so it's really fun when now some of our micro churches, we get to watch that sort of thing happen. So kudos to you, but also just what a great picture for people listening of what micro church life can be like when it's done right.
Yeah. And I think it's like, to me, just the joy of the journey, right? It's like, to me, there's no kudos needed because it's just, I feel like it's such a gift to me.
Hmm.
And yeah, I agree. Of like, I think we always talk about, I think there's a lot of language about church being family, at least like in the places I worked. But I think a lot of times that ends up being mostly just language for something that's corporate and institutionalized. And I think sometimes people get really hurt because of that too, right?
Hmm.
But it's been really, really awesome to get to experience in this phase of life of what does it look like to be family and to be truly like integrated with one another, even as we do live different lives. And in New Hampshire we're a little bit more spread out, right? Than I think maybe in Waltham or some more urban areas. So yeah, it's been really meaningful to me.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I think that actually kind of like leads us into our topic that I think we should talk about. And I'm glad you brought this, that we're talking about getting comfortable with the mundane and ordinary. And here in a second, I actually want you to read a quote from this beautiful little book, Liturgy of the Ordinary from Tish Harrison Warren. But I one of the reasons we're bringing this is one of the things, the lessons a lot of what drives us in this podcast are things that we've seen and
Hmm.
we've learned along the way. And this seems to be one of those things that like I think we're getting better at naming it, that if people don't go through this transformation process of like realizing that they've probably become addicted to the extraordinary,
Hmm.
um, it gets really hard to do this work because it is embedded in your mundane and ordinary life. It's filled with a lot of just very small moments that you have to dig a little bit deeper to see um, progress or what God's doing or victories. Um, and I think it's stripped of some of the, uh, for lack of a better term, some of the spiritual highs that we've kind of often become
Hmm.
addicted to kind of get us through, like, oh, I can get through the next couple of months until the next bit of that. And so, yeah, I think once you get on the other side of it, this is actually one of the most, at least for my own life, we're going to talk about this. One of the most beautiful things that has ever happened to me over the last 7, 8 years is going through this process. And once you're on the other side of it, it's like, you know, the scales fall from your eyes. It's like, how did I
Hmm.
never see this before? And so it's really hard because I think you want others to go through that as well. And so we're going to talk through it, but at the end of the day, we also recognize like this is one of those things you have to go on the journey.
You have to
Uh,
experience it.
you have to experience it. And so we're going to do our best in this episode to describe what that looks like, but we're going to recognize that like there's no way that we can talk you into this. It's going to just be the journey that you have to put the time in to experience. So,
Yeah. Let me read this quote from Tish Harrison Warren. She says, "In the Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard reminds us that when transformation is actually carried out in our real life, where we dwell with God and our neighbors, first we must accept the circumstances we constantly find ourselves in as a place of God's kingdom and blessing. God is yet to bless anyone except where they actually are. The new life into which we are baptized is lived out in days, hours, minutes. God is forming us into a new people. and the place of that formation is the small moments of today. Alfred Hitchcock said once that movies are life with the dull bits cut out. Car chases and first kisses, interesting plot lines, and good conversations. We don't want to watch our lead character going on a walk, stuck in traffic, or brushing their teeth, at least not for long, and not without a good soundtrack. We tend to want a Christian life with the bits cut out. So I think that quote is so wonderful and poignant. But let me start by asking you a question, Drew. Why do you think it is that we are so drawn to the extraordinary over the ordinary, when, especially when, not just in life in general, but especially in Christian life?
Well, I mean, I think some of it, I mean, it does come from our real life. I mean, I think we live in a world where, you know, from the time that we're kids, we are drawn to outliers. We're drawn to extraordinary people. And so from superhero, movies and books, for me as a kid, it was, I was drawn to sports. And so it was sports, basketball and golf and football players that I was like, oh, like it seems like they're great. It can be celebrities. It can be someone who's made some achievement in life and has recognition. I think so many of us are drawn to that. And then I think it's only perpetuated, as so many cultural commentators have talked about now with the rise of social media and the internet, where
Mm-hmm.
we see everyone else's curated realities. And it's often in comparison to what we're experiencing, whether or not it's actually true. We have a hard time always recognizing that. And so when we see filters on someone else's trip or something they're experiencing and we compare it to what we're dealing with, there feels like there's a chasm there. And so like we would be silly. And I think so, I talk about this so much, but I feel like we do such a poor job in the church. We always talk about the culture as if we aren't affected by it or that we're not bringing it in with us. And
Right.
so many of us, we bring that into our faith. We're living with that. And I think we often do the same thing in church circles. We
Mm-hmm.
start to like assign value to certain attributes or skills or gifts. And
Mm-hmm.
we say like, well, comparison to my journey, what I see of that person, how talented they are speaking or teaching or singing or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is, like there's a gap and I feel bad about myself. And then, so we already bring that in. And then you add in, and we don't have time to talk about this, but we live downstream of so much like revivalism and some broken theology about escapism,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, we could spend 5 hours unpacking the ramifications of, the last 150 years in American church life and what we've inherited. But we walk into a lot of our, not all of our churches, but a lot of our churches have curated experiences for us, um, to try to elicit certain emotions out of us, to create to quote unquote an experience. And so you bring all that together, it's kind of like a pretty lethal cocktail for us,
Mm-hmm.
where I think not only our own stories and our own personhood and our own like I I'm actually like don't want ordinary, I don't want mundane because I'm chasing what I'm seeing around me. But also like I've been kind of taught that spiritual experiences should feel like this certain adrenaline high that I have, this emotional experience that I'm having in this auditorium. And so you bring all that together, and I think it makes sense why we would like step into our normal lives and be like, yeah, this isn't great. And I don't want this. And I'm going to pursue and chase a spirituality that, like a drug addict, keeps helping me feel extraordinary and not ordinary. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think very similarly that there's just, I mean, instant gratification is the water we swim in our general culture these days, and I think that that's been hugely impactful in the American church as well. But I also feel like there is something to the way scale and like measurable impact is
Mm,
has been immediately aligned with faithfulness. Like
Mm.
if you're, and I think there's something to maybe specifically with our age. I think another factor of this is being a millennial. I think we've been raised with this mentality of you're gonna change the world, right? Like there is this
Yeah.
I heard that in school growing up. I went to public schools, but then I also heard that in church.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I remember very acutely when I was deciding what I was gonna do after Bible college, just feeling like, am I gonna change the world
Mm.
with this job like that I'm about to do? And I guess like thankfully, no matter how I sliced it at that point, I was going into some form of vocational ministry. So I think you can like justify in your mind more like, oh, this is changing the world in some ways. But like if we're honest with ourselves, most of our everyday ordinary lives does not feel like changing the world. It feels
Mm.
like changing diapers or just being in 700 Zoom meetings that you like don't want to be in.
Well,
And
it's so funny you said that. Tish Harrison Warren has a quote in the book where she says, "Everyone wants to change the world, but nobody wants to do the dishes."
yeah,
That's
exactly.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I know I have felt that so much and you almost feel I don't know if other people can relate to this. It's almost like those tiny mundane moments. It feels like you're wasting. It feels like I should be figuring out how to be changing the world, and if I'm not, I'm being wasteful, I'm being lazy, I'm not figuring out what it is that God wants from me. I'm not doing like the utmost and being
Yeah.
excellent, right? And so I think there is something to even just a lot of like this excellence language in production value in organizational leadership that has gotten into the American church. We put so much value in achieving. and and like if you're not achieving to whatever the metrics are in your context, then you're probably not being faithful to God. And so I think it's not just that we seek that high, but it's almost like internally we know that we will also be shamed if we're not hitting those
Yep.
metrics.
Yep.
And so I think that's what stands out to me in that. Does that
I
make sense?
oh yeah. I think there's so many things as you were talking. Like I love that what you were describing because I do think it can. So again, we could talk about this forever. It's so sinister, all the different ways that that starts to show up. But
Mm-hmm.
I was even just thinking, like, I was guilty of this, but I was raised the same way. I love the change the world thing. Like the kind of illustrations that are used in communicating,
Mm-hmm.
like that conveys a lot, and how we use these like exceptional, like, how many times I've heard some sermon illustration about Jim Elliot or Nate Saint, giving their lives,
Yeah.
and like it's like the bar is so high, like if you're not doing that, you've not truly gone all in with your faith, and you need to be willing to fly to another country and lose your life,
Right.
for the sake of the gospel, and how much we uh, internalize those messages and we begin to believe like that's actually true and we need to actually do that. And what that starts to do, you think about how that makes you start to think about the Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
So I love what you're describing because yeah, you know, I think through how many of those messages I heard, how much I wanted, people were like, you need to be the next Apostle Paul, and how much I
Mm-hmm.
was like, that was the messaging that I was receiving all the time. Nothing about my actual life. It was I needed an extraordinary life beyond what I was actually doing because that's what God desired from me.
Yeah. And we're already kind of going there, but I think we should flesh out more how this kind of mindset hinders our faith and growth. And maybe we can talk more personally about the issues and we've seen in our own lives. I think like playing off of what you were sharing, I know I had this moment in my mid 20s where I felt so acutely like I've been told over and over in the past few years, like, you're going to do big things for God. And I remember like having this moment that at some point that stopped feeling like encouraging and motivational, and I really had ingested it as pressure. Like,
Hmm.
how do I know that I've done the big thing for God I'm supposed to be doing? And when does that stop? Like, how do I know this is the big thing? And I also recognized, I think, the more I sat with that, that a lot of this idea that people are saying, like, you're going to do big things for God, were very clearly about encouraging performative skills I had, right?
Hmm.
You're good at speaking, you're good at being on stage, you're good at like whatever. And so you're going to do big things for God. And I just knew that for me, I felt a lot of anxiety when I was performing most of those tasks. Like I did not feel good um speaking, like I could do it, but I don't feel good on the inside most of the time when I'm doing it. Like I don't love being on stage leading worship, but these were the things that were so valued in the system. And so I felt a little bit like I was stuck in a treadmill, and that if I wanted to get off, it was because I was too scared to be faithful. I wasn't all in or whatever it was. And I think it just formed this like very like warped spirituality that felt like, I mean, this is like a core issue for me for different reasons too, not just this, but I think this kind of mechanism reinforced the earning. I have like a huge problem with like always feeling like I need to earn approval from God, or like I need to make him happy. And I know like intellectually that's not true, but it's like so embedded in my body, and I think I'll be unpacking that probably for a long time in my
Mm.
life. However, I think being on this kind of trajectory reinforced that so much more for me, of like if
Mm.
I'm not doing these things that are quote maybe on the runway of doing a big thing for God, then I'm definitely like God's definitely not happy with me. Um and so I think it made it really hard to just be a human being, like to have failures, to I don't know, be depressed, like to have all these things that were actually happening for me underneath the surface, but I felt like I had to keep it so tight to make sure I was achieving the big things for God, that I felt pretty paralyzed on the inside, but I don't think I was really able to fully like unpack that and acknowledge it, because if I did, I knew I would put that like assembly line to full stop, and we couldn't afford that.
Mm.
Is how I felt. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. I mean, though I come at it from the other side where uh, all of those skills were really natural for me. You know, I grew up as a preacher's kid, and I think you just, I mean, if you lived around the church, like I like pretty quickly figured out, like, I know how to preach. I know how to do church stuff. I've been around this my whole life. It just
Mm-hmm.
was like, there was, the same way, like, in sports, there'll be someone who's a coach's kid that just like innately knows how to do certain things because they've been
Yeah.
around it. It was the same way for me. Um, and for me, that was actually more lethal, where like I had to, and I think the journey I've been on is realizing that I was really addicted to achieving. I didn't really have an identity in my faith outside of
Mm.
my my performance and my achieving, and what you were saying, some of those skills that I had acquired. And so much of the journey that I've been on, for the last decade, but in particular the last 7, 8 years, is just being okay with me, and being
Mm-hmm.
okay with uh, the the still small voice of God, without all of that achieving. And it was hard because I realized, that a lot of, I really just didn't have, like, almost what you were describing. I didn't have a box for God's work in the world. I didn't have a metric, without, up and to the right in whatever area of my life, advancement. It's
Mm-hmm.
really distorted. And then I think with that, I think one of the things I've had to work through is just realizing, and I think you're kind of getting at it. And I think this really connects so much to what we do at Renaissance, but how much that those sort of messages allow, if you're in professional ministry or a clergy member, for you to stand, like, it's almost like you're 1A in Christian faith and everyone else. Because I think, getting to your question about how this hinders our faith and growth beyond myself, is what I've seen for so many people is, um, whether, and I think there'll be some people that are listening to this that are clergy that really might not like this, but honestly, like, now that I live a different life than I used to live, I can realize how privileged of a position. Like, there is a lot of hard work and there's stress, absolutely, but there is a lot of privilege when it comes to the spiritual life and what you can do for God, obviously, when it's your job and you get to have all the space to do it. For the average person who is hustling just to get by, um, and is dealing with all kinds of stresses from work, they might not get home till 6:30 because they've been working all day and they've had to commute, or they're worrying about how to get their kids down to bed, or and just all the other tasks. Like, I got dishes to do, and I've got this thing going on, that thing, or are going through seasons of loss or pain or difficulty, some of the things that we talk about and convey are not ever going to be possible for them. And if we don't have a category for spiritual formation that recognizes that, we are so far off from what God is inviting us into that we have completely missed the plot. And my fear is, and I've been talking about this a lot to people, is I do appreciate that in the last 20 or 30 years, we've started to move where spiritual formation is becoming a bigger part of the conversation in the church. But even the way we talk about spiritual formation is based in privilege. Like there is a lot of people in my community that have to work 6+ days a week to put food on the table. This idea that they can take a whole day for Sabbath, the way that some of it's talked about in some of our spiritual discipline books, or some of our more, I'm not going to name them, but more of our popular spiritual formation conversations, it's just undoable for them. Or that they're going to have a tech blackout where it's like, no, I actually have to have access to my phone, whether I like it or not, because of the job I have, or because of or yeah, that's great, but I'm going to have to be on, yeah, I would love to do X or Y, but I'm going to be sitting on Zoom calls for the next, you know, 50 hours of my week, because that's how I pay my bills. Or I've got 3 kids and this is just right now I'm just in survival mode, like just trying to get, whatever it is, we can just go on down the list. If we don't have a category for how God is showing up in the midst of that and
Right.
wants to meet people there and wants to do something there, then I I think we need to like go back to our Bibles and read again what's going on in scripture, because I think we've completely missed the God of the Bible. And I think we have decided that he can only work in these like corporate metrics, um,
Mhm.
with the outliers who actually have the privilege and the time and the space to live this quote unquote spiritual extraordinary life.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there, and I think something that it highlights for me as well is that when I was vocational clergy, you're right. I had so much time dedicated to making things happen that had to do with church and spirituality, which like some parts of it I miss
Yeah.
like having like multiple hours of my day where I could just be praying at work, but I'm like that I can't do that. I work at a tech company and we're shipping 7 million products right now because of AI. Like
Yeah.
there are parts of it I'm not like dogging on that. And at the same time, I think we also miss the aspect of spirituality. Like something I've noticed, I think I mentioned it on the podcast before. My last couple years of life have been really hectic. Like I was in grad school full time. I was working full time in a new industry. I do some stuff with Renaissance, blah, blah, blah. I'm do therapist part time, and now like I'm
Yeah,
not doing grad school, but
you're quad vocational, I like to say.
I am living. But I also like, I'm not in grad school anymore, but I still have a lot of plates spinning. And something that there are parts of me that like feel bad. That I'm like, our microchurch like organizational stuff does not get my best time and energy. It
Mm.
just doesn't. Like I wish I could be like, you know what, I spend the first day of the week just planning and thinking about what we're gonna be like together. Like I don't. It's like Saturday, oh whoops, here's where we're going this week. Do we want to do this? Who wants to lead communion? Um, but I will say, I think like there's parts of that that I personally wish wasn't like that. But I will say what's been really, really cool for me is the way that has given so much more space for mutuality. That's like I don't have to put everything on together. And because I literally can't, we are such a more like we're a community that has so much more mutuality because other people fill in the gaps like when they can. And not everybody can every week, but like as people have time and space, we are truly becoming a community together that like meets one another's needs. And it's like I never really got to experience that because I had all the time in the world to make everything happen for everybody. And now that I don't, it's like sometimes I can't make it happen this week. I can't remember to send the Slack. I can't remember to like organize, or I don't have time and somebody else will do it. Like other people have ideas for how our community might like be together and it's like that's wonderful. That's amazing. I think we miss out on that when we do spend all of our time capitalized on like all the things I can do when I have dedicated time and space to do it.
Yep.
Um And so I think like I wanted to highlight the flip side of that of like there is something that I think we miss out on in really being embedded in a community that is mutual and
Well,
everyone participates.
and I would want to take it a step further, like not just in microchurch life, but in like practitioner life.
Mm,
I think in the same way, like what kind of what you're getting at is, the flip side of practitioner life when this is doing really good, like going really good, is I think there's a lot of parts of our existence and our being that we diminish
mm,
because it's not glamorous or extraordinary. And I think this actually, what you're describing is one facet of that playing out in microchurch life as well.
mm-hmm,
But I think there's a lot of other, like, I think there's people in our lives. I think there's moments in our lives. There's things in our lives that matter deeply
mm-hmm,
and are beautiful or wonderful, or God is doing something and we miss it because it doesn't fit the categories of extraordinary that we've been
mm,
taught to see. And so I think part of what this journey is teaching us is to get rid of this shame that if my life doesn't look like X, Y, or Z, I'm falling short in the Christian life.
yep,
Uh, and it's more of saying like, no, like my life does matter. Let's stop and remind ourselves that we talk about this a lot, but John 1:14, Jesus took on flesh and bone and became one of us. The incarnation has so many components that we could talk about, but
mm-hmm,
at least one of them is the fact that God chose to come in human form, acknowledging that our being, our humanity matters. Our
mm-hmm,
lives, who we are matter. And more than that, as we declare every Christmas, every Advent season, he didn't come to a palace. He didn't come to a cathedral. Didn't come to a synagogue. He came to a few poor peasants, uh, and we know his first 30 years was in utter obscurity.
mm-hmm,
Jesus wasn't doing extraordinary spiritual things.
mm-hmm,
In fact, we have no record or account of it. As best we know, his father was a carpenter. Maybe he was just learning a trade and doing the mundane, ordinary grind of that every single day. We could spend a lot of time talking, but that means that our everyday, ordinary life, our embodied reality matters to God. In fact, he showed up to show us that it does. When
mm-hmm,
Jesus cries out in the Beatitudes about blessed are these people, he's telling these poor people at the bottom rung of the economic and cultural ladder that
mm-hmm,
their existence matters. And somehow we've taken that and we've packaged the Christian faith into this idea that that's not true and only these extraordinary things matter. And we have to help people reset, get like a different frame, where they start to show up and make inventory and say, yeah, like from the moment my feet hit the floor, if I can learn, and again, this is the journey. It doesn't happen overnight. I can begin to see that there is not anything in my life that is too small or too insignificant or too mundane for God to use. And that's the thing that I think hinders us, is because we've never been given permission. No one's ever cheered us on to slow down, to reorient, to make that happen. And so instead, we're filled with shame and filled with, oh, I wish I had the time to do X, or I wish I could do this, rather than saying, you know what? I can wish away. It's never going to happen. I just right now, in the season of life that I'm in, I have a 3-year-old or a 1-year-old, or I've got 2 jobs because I'm just trying to get ahead, or I'm in the midst of school, or whatever it is. And instead of, oh, I wish I could do X, Y, or Z to be that person or to
mm-hmm.
look like this, I just acknowledge, like, I am who I am. My life is my life. It matters. And how do I begin to see God there and reframe it as there's significance in those small things, in the mundane, if I'll choose to, if I'll choose to change my perspective.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think part of what you're sharing too reminds me, and we might get more into this later, is like I think when we are stuck on doing the extraordinary, we also like totally ignore God's agency because it's on us to make it happen, right? And I think there's something so beautiful, and I know from my personal journey of just like not feeling like it's resting on my shoulders at the end of the day, and I can live my ordinary life
Mm,
and believe that God is working in the world and try to pay attention to where he's inviting me to join him. But also, like, I don't have to be the closer. I might not even be involved. I might be some random little part in the middle. Like, and that the joy is like discerning and discovering that and not feeling like every single thing I got to make sure I like
yeah.
really like nail it start to finish, or else like this person's not going to be saved and I'm not changing the world. Like I just like, oh, like God is doing a lot of stuff. What's he actually inviting me into today? And like, it's going to be okay. And I think
Yeah.
it starts bringing, at least for me, this freedom in following Jesus that is so like, if I've said this before to our microchurch, so like for me the last few years, it's like for the first time being a part of church and trying to follow Jesus is starting to feel like relief and
Mm.
rest rather than this like hustle and grind and like, oh, like I'm not meeting the Jesus KPIs. Like
That should be the title of your book.
Jesus KPIs.
Yeah.
Yeah, help. Subtitles help. Slash please stop.
Well, and I think even what you were saying, I know we need to move on, but just like, you know, I was just imagining, yeah, well, one, what is it, Matthew 11:28 through 30 in the message about learning, come all you who are, burdened, heavy laden, I will give you rest. I love the way the message talks about it being the unforced rhythms of grace.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like learning those unforced rhythms of grace, and giving ourselves grace, in the day to day. But, even what you were saying too, like when we push that, I think there's people that we end up casting aside or moments that we cast aside that have value. I even think about like in our early days of starting Renaissance, I had an idea of the kind of people that we were going to like get as our practitioners and our microchurch leaders. And our earliest iterations were not those people. The kind
Mm-hmm.
of people that were in the first couple of microchurches I was in, the first couple of people that we were coaching. And I'm so thankful that my
Mm-hmm.
vision was wrong because by honoring those people and walking with them, mostly out of the fact that I didn't have anything else to do. Otherwise, I probably, in my brokenness and my toxicity, would have chased after something cooler. Uh, those are some of the best gifts in my life, and they've been the best
Mm-hmm.
gifts to my family, been some of the best gifts to our network,
Yeah.
and it was a lot of small, mundane, little things, a lot of frustration in the moment because it was like not adding up to what I thought it was going to be. And God was just like, I got this.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop trying to force, what you want. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I'm doing something. Can you just have the perspective to see it?
Yeah. I think we really like you really like hit the nail on the head of like this is just about like unwrapping our own egos in some way and just like we are not the center of the universe or the center of God's story, and that's a really really good thing. Um and so maybe we can just start like winding this conversation down and maybe talk through like how do we begin to get comfortable stepping out of this like extraordinary spiritual framework, and what does it look like to reset that and for us to start getting into a more embodied, healthy spirituality. What do you think?
Goodness. I mean, for so many people, I think it is just going on we have a practitioner pathway. It is going on a journey of, and as hard as this is for people, stepping out of some of the spaces, and some of the places they've been to go on a journey of slowing down, taking a deep breath, and making, and have, again, we obviously, a lot of us are still busy. We don't have a lot of time, but just enough time to stop with performative religious activity, to give ourselves some margin to actually take inventory of our real life. And it's wonderful if we obviously have people that can go with us on that journey, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, really in essence what microchurch life is. But I think the journey is being brave enough to step away, and then that's when it's almost like a drug addict. We have so many of these conversations with people who get so excited, they love what we're doing, and then they start on the journey and they have these mini freak out moments along the way
Mm-hmm.
because there's all this underlying motivation underneath the surface that
Yep.
they've never stopped and processed in their spiritual journey. You know, if you want to talk about performative spirituality anonymous, like let me stand up and be the first one. Like if it takes people, whatever it takes normal people, it probably took me 3 times as long to go through that because I had so much, and I'm still working through it. There's still days that it's bad, that it rears its head. But uh, that's those moments are okay. And so I think it just is going on the journey of stepping away and just starting to acknowledge some of those motivations that you have and diving down like why are you so stressed about that?
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll have these moments like, oh, I've had 2 conversations with my neighbor and I feel, you'll hear someone like, well, I haven't had this talk with them yet. Okay, can we stop? Why do you feel like by the third conversation you have already needed to work something in? Or I started a micro church and 6 months in it's not become X or Y. Okay, well
Mm-hmm.
can we stop and acknowledge like why do you like feel that way? Or you'll hear stuff like, well, I feel like I'm really gifted at X and I'm not being able to use it. Well, why do you think that God's only plan for your life is for you to operate in like your pocket all the time of your
Mm-hmm.
like what you're great like we can keep walking these out. So if you never step away from those spaces and never deal with any of that and process through, again, this is why we have spiritual directors that we
Mm-hmm.
want you to walk alongside because they're really good at asking these questions and helping you discover God's voice. But I think it's going to require you ripping off the band-aid and stepping away and then going on the journey, because that's when so much of this starts to get uncovered. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love those examples that you walked out, and I've definitely heard those and lived some of those, my fair share as well. I I I think that one of the things that comes to mind, maybe a question to help people start peeling this back, is like, when do I not feel important?
Mm,
And how come? I think like to me that is like a really good guide, at least it has been for me, of realizing I'm used to feeling important or like I'm doing important things in in like walking with Jesus, or at least and maybe this is just like my own personal neuroticism and no one else can relate to this. But
no,
I'm
this
just used to
I'm
being like, if this matters, I'm probably feeling important.
mm,
If this is like impactful, then I'm probably feeling important. Um and then I realizing that means I attribute that I'm doing important things, right? But usually that has some sort of like measurement in my mind about why it's an important thing.
yeah.
And so I think a lot of what people will experience is if you start going on this journey, a lot of life's just going to feel not important, and then you start
Mhm.
feeling weird and empty like,
Mm,
oh, like I'm probably doing the wrong thing. And you might not be able to put words to it, but it feels like that. I'm on the wrong track because I don't feel actually that important and my life doesn't feel that important anymore. Um I'm not chasing after these things. And so I think that has been helpful for me of like, where am I not feeling important? How come? And then it just helps me guide to like, actually, like a lot of my life is important to God and to me. It just doesn't feel the way that it used to feel. Or maybe I need to redial and say, like, yeah, like these, the time that I'm spending with my coworkers at this job that is very corporate, that matters. Like, I'm not like preaching the gospel to them, but I'm like being a good coworker, being a good teammate, being a good friend, that matters. Like, does not give you the emotional rush or high
no,
at all, but it matters. It's really important actually in
yeah.
following Jesus and being faithful. And but I think like you have to reset that dial, and I think it just starts with noticing like, oh, maybe the reason why I'm freaking out a little bit is because I feel unimportant, or I feel like the work I'm doing is unimportant, and then getting underneath that of like, is it? Am I? What's this about?
Gosh, well, I mean, that I just feel like that alone, we could spend a whole nother podcast just talking about that. But as you were describing it, well, one, no, you're not, alone in that. I feel very much the same way. And I've seen a lot of other people that we've walked alongside very much feeling the same way. And to that point, I can peel back the layer of my own life here. Like, this is one of the things I've been working through with my spiritual director. And one of the things, like, you're going to laugh at this. This is how toxic this has been for me. But, like, For the first time in my life, I really feel content. And like, I'm a character in the drama of my neighborhood. I'm working to be a good husband and a good father, a
Mhm.
good neighbor, a good friend. I've spent my whole life packing up my bags and moving to the next adventure, to the next big thing, chasing it. And I've had to process for the last like year and a half, 2 years, like I don't have this like next big thing imminent in my life. And to the point, which it's so funny, I'm probably like getting to the healthiest place in my life. And yet so much, if you were even looking at my journal, you would think that there's something so wrong with me because I'm like, well, why is it like, am I like, have I lost something? Have I like, why isn't there this next big grand spiritual thing that I'm chasing after? And just processing with my spiritual director, like, no, actually, you're becoming healthy. That's kind of what God wants for you, is not just to be this spiritual high seeker chasing the next adventure, to this point that there's a rallying cry. There's a beautiful film I love called A Hidden Life, and there's a quote that appears in that is it's actually on my Facebook cover, that is like been my quote from George Eliot that I just like keep coming back to. He says this: "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." And if you know the movie, you will understand why that quote gets appeared there. I won't give any spoiler alerts, but I love this idea that like these faithful people who did things, they have unvisited tombs. No one knows their names in history. They were forgotten within a generation. And yet they did beautiful, wonderful things that God used. They're part of his grand sweeping story. Uh, and how do I get to the place where that's enough and that's okay? That I join God's sweeping story in a narrative, and uh, I start to actually make inventory of my actual existence and not chasing something disembodied that's apart from me, surfing my phone or looking at others with jealousy or envy, or discounting moments because they don't feel spectacular. And I think a lot of that, we've talked about it in previous episodes, also means that we have to start having an embodied spirituality that takes more inventory of our actual existence, and we stop and try to say, God, where might you be showing up here that I may have missed you? And to
Yeah.
keep asking that question day after day after day,
Mhm.
till we recognize his voice, or we recognize his presence, or the way that he's showing up, and we stop discounting, you know, our jobs,
Mhm.
our tasks, our errands, our families, our neighbors, and instead say, no, all of this is filled with wonder. All of this is part of a story. And how do I just join that story?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very like Brother Lawrence practicing the presence of God, right? It's like probably a lot of people have heard of that spiritual title, and it's like this prolific little work, but it's also like he was just like a dishwasher in the monastery for years and years. And that's like where he felt like God showed him those things. And I resonate so much with what you're sharing about like probably being the healthiest I've ever felt. And then I think it is like it's so embedded, this other programming, that I've had so many moments the last few. I've mentioned this to our micro church. I've mentioned it to, I know you guys at Renaissance, where I'm like, there have been just a couple moments, especially in the last like year and a half, 2 years, where I'm like, I'm really happy and I'm content. I think something's wrong. Like, I must be doing this wrong. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not stressed about like proving anything about my walk with God. I'm like, I feel really good. And then like, am I on the slippery slope? Like,
you're so
I'm just
complacent.
I'm just mailing it in now. Oh no. And then I'm like, wait, like I don't think God wants me to like live in this perpetual anxiety. Like that doesn't make sense.
But
But it's so like I'm like noticing that in myself where I'm like I'm truly like happy and content and I feel pretty good. Like and then
mm,
I'm like, wait, I must be too comfortable.
well, and think about it. I just recently communicated. I was guest preaching somewhere, it just hit me as I was writing the message. Like I was talking on peace, and I was just like, look at the fruits of the spirit, where God's presence is there and the Spirit's activity is happening. Doesn't say anything about excellence. Doesn't say anything about like being awesome. or accomplishing or achieving anything. What does it say? That we have love and like you can almost just feel the exhale, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, suffering, all these attributes. And like those sorts of things are small. They're insignificant. But if you've been in the presence of someone who embodies those, you get it, you feel it. And I'm also probably neurotic and I don't feel those things all the time, but I so deeply want it that I'm so content in my life and what God is doing and recognize that I can take that exhale and that I would embody those things because I probably have a 9 attributes of the spirit that I think, and they're probably all just based on achievement and accomplishment. Yeah.
I think that that's like such a good picture of like, I think what you find as you start to you probably feel a little bit uncomfortable at first and like, oh, maybe even a little bit empty, like you're not doing the right thing. But I think once you get into far enough, it does feel like relief. It feels like exhale. It feels like rest. And like I think that's never made sense to me until now of like what does it mean to like rest in God when you have like a full busy life as well? And it's like, oh, it's because God's a part of everything. And if you can just like stop getting so like in front of yourself and let God show you his presence in everyday ordinary stuff, life starts becoming restful because of the presence of God, even if you're doing lots of busy things to make ends meet or whatever it is. Like we all have things we have to do, right? And so I think like that picture you're painting, it just really resonates.
Mhm.
I want us to just like I think we're like I feel like I've said everything I need to say, but
Mhm.
let's have you finish us off, Drew, of like final word of advice for somebody that's just new to this and wants to take a first step.
I mean, I think what we're describing is probably the worst sales pitch of all time. But like, uh, step away from all the coolness and the gadgets and the flash,
Hmm.
and I commit to at least 4 or 5 years just saying, God, like, I'm going to go slow. I'm going to be simple. I'm going to be rooted. And I'm going to trust that in this process, you're going to do something in me.
Hmm.
Um, and it is uncomfortable, like anything, like that's worth good, and worth doing. Um, but I really think, and I've seen this across our network, I think it'll change your life.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite things about our network is that I don't look across our network and see a bunch of burned out people.
Hmm.
I don't see a bunch of people who feel guilt and shame all the time, or are trying to do things out of compulsion. I really do see people who look more like Jesus now than when I even met them, and to me that says something that um, I was not expecting about this journey. Uh, I think when I first started it, it was about I found a new way to accomplish God's mission.
Yeah.
We see that happening, but it looks different sometimes than I might have expected. And in the process, I see people who are becoming whole, um, and are finding rest and are learning the unforced rhythms of grace. It's
Hmm.
sometimes it's easier than others, and we have seasons where we still revert, but to me, that's what excites me about the journey. I just want more people to experience that, to just realize that their mundane, ordinary life does matter. And whatever we can do to serve and help people walk in that, I want to be a part of it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We can't wait to continue this podcast journey with you and walk through the realities of following God in every day. We do want you to know that because fall is coming up, we have some new cohorts starting. So if anything from this conversation resonated with you and you want to take some next steps and figure out what that might look like in your life, reach out to us at hub@wearerenaissance.org and we can get you connected to our next cohorts. And we would love to do that. If you want to find out more about us in general, whether it's our microchurches, cohorts, events, whatever, we're here. Head to wearerenaissance.org and we'll catch you next time.